Hi everyone. Thanks so much for sticking with us. So my name is Rasi and I've been leading the design and program readiness for STIRS program in Indonesia since 2022. So I think it's been amazing to see the program grows, and today is especially very meaningful to me as we just heard about the impact evaluation of our work in Indonesia. But I think I'm more excited to actually look beyond Indonesia and discuss the how can motivation science supercharge education systems in these uncertain times. So I'll be moderating our panel discussion on this very topic. So we have an incredible group of experts from around the world. So to four of our panelists, we are very honored to have you here with us today. So just a quick note to our audience, if you have any questions, so you can drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So I think without further ado, let's meet our panelists. So to our panelists, please could you briefly introduce yourself? So just your name and a quick overview of the work that you do. So Aashti, why don't we start with you?
Thanks so much, Rezi. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Aashti Zaidi, and I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called the Global Schools Forum, which I set up in 2017. GSF is a global learning community, an innovation accelerator, and a partnership builder. We currently have 165 education organizations across Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America that are part of the GSF community. And between them, they collectively run or support 1.35 million ECD centers and schools, reaching just over 120 million children. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Aashti. Goretti, would you like to go next?
Sure. Oops. Sorry. Yeah, here, my name is Mary Goretti Nakabugo. You can call me Goretti. And I'm based here in Uganda. I work with an organization called Uwezo Uganda. We do undertake learning assessments, and we would like to provide evidence to the system for purposes of improving learning outcomes. We also do undertake research and engage in partnerships. We partner with STAR in different ways, but our main purpose is improvement of learning outcomes through the use of evidence. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Goretti. Pankaj, over to you.
My name is Pankaj. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Transform Schools. We are a India-based secondary education-focused organization. We only focus on secondary school outcomes, and we do three very simple but very difficult things. For that one, we work at really large scale innovations development to look at what sort of innovations will work in sort of resource-poor settings in secondary education. Second is we work with system actors to scale these. And currently we are building a collaborative with support from colleagues like Aashti to really bring more and more attention to how important that is for children, and their learning and their lives. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pankaj. And finally, to our final, Koen, over to you.
Thanks, and thanks for pronouncing my name correctly. That's a rare feat. It's Koen. That's well done. Yeah, I work as an education innovation and grants expert at Enabel. Enabel is the Belgian Agency for International Cooperation. And within the agency, we have an innovation hub. And within the innovation hub, we launch call for proposals. One of them was about innovative approaches for teacher training. That's part of a European global gateway approach, which means it's quite a large project, but the part that I follow up is actually 8 grantees in Sub-Saharan Africa that are trying exciting things in teacher training. And yeah, it's very exciting for me to be part of that. I think it's a really interesting and applied part of an important piece of the puzzle in teacher training and the scaling of good solutions of that. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Koen. So I'll go right into the questions. So I have a few questions lined up. I think I would go first with Aashti. So Aashti, Global Schools Forum works with a lot of organizations that are trying to make education better for children. So based on what you have seen from the STIRS education impact evaluation, what do you see as the opportunities and also the challenges for motivation science to support maybe the work of your partners and also other similar organizations? So yeah, Aashti.
Thank you so much. So first of all, just wanted to congratulate the STIR team for sharing the results of these evaluations and really encouraging us to think about the results, both where you've seen positive outcomes, but also where you've seen less positive outcomes, and just kind of being transparent and honest and encouraging all of us as a sector to think about how we can apply some of the learnings from motivation science to our work. So thank you for that. And Rezi, to your question, looking at these findings through the lens of the GSF community, I see several kind of practical implications and opportunities. Maybe I'll just quickly touch on 5 of them. As I mentioned, the community is made up of non-state education providers in the Global South. So the first opportunity is really around resource optimization. As we were told by the team, at under sort of $1 per child, with some measurable learning gains, motivation approaches are offering our partners within the GSF community quite a cost-effective way to enhance the impact of their existing programs without significant additional investment. So this becomes really critical when you're serving marginalized communities, and particularly in kind of lower resource contexts. The second thing that struck me was around teacher sustainability. So many of our partners struggle with teacher recruitment, teacher retention, and teacher development, again, in quite remote areas. The findings suggest that focusing particularly on autonomy, on mastery and purpose could simultaneously have an impact on improving both teacher quality, but also addressing some of these staffing challenges. Thirdly, contextual innovation. So obviously, our partners bring really deep contextual knowledge of what works in their unique context and for the communities that they serve. They're uniquely positioned, I think, to adapt some of the learnings from these 2 evaluations and from the motivation science principles that John shared to really diverse cultural settings. And that will, I think, create a more of a repository of locally led, locally contextualized approaches that could benefit the wider sector. Finally, I think, fourthly, system alignment. The finding that motivation interventions can amplify existing priorities is relevant for our partners that are oftentimes working in partnership with government. It suggests that motivation science can help bridge private and public and non-state approaches, creating more coherent educational experiences for children. And then finally, just in terms of kind of the learning crisis that John alluded to, most of our partners are working in contexts where learning outcomes remain persistently quite low despite increased access. And we think that motivation approaches can offer a pathway to enhance learning without requiring like a fundamental redesign or extensive new resources to really have a positive impact. So those are, I think, the 5 key opportunities that I see for some of the findings that came out of the evaluation. I have some challenges, but I'll let you maybe speak to some of the other folks on the panel.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Aashti, so for highlighting how motivation science could support the partners in the field. So adapt, contextualization. So I think let's build on the idea of these using the idea of motivation in large-scale efforts. So, Koen, you've worked with education innovation across different contexts. So right now, with the uncertainty and also the rapid changes in the global development, so what do you see as the potential for motivation-informed approaches in maximizing the effectiveness of the education interventions? So yeah, Koen.
Yeah, right. I think to answer that question, I actually wanted to start with a little bit of a personal story. Because I think I have a textbook example of what motivation can do to a person. I attempted my first master's study when I was 18, as many of us do, but I miserably failed because I had, I think, zero motivation at the time. I had no clue what I was doing or why I was studying what I was studying, and it really felt like it was going nowhere. I don't really need, or I didn't really need science to tell me that. But I'm very happy to report that after many, many years, a few years ago, I had a second attempt at a master study. And this time, I think I was quite clear about where I wanted to go with that, why I was doing that. I had a full-time job. I was living abroad. We were expecting a first child. And I still decided to give it a go because I was really convinced. And I think it was purely intrinsic motivation that really drove me to do that. There was nobody outside of me to expect that from me. It was purely an inside thing. And yeah, quite frankly, I think my wife may actually disagree, but I thoroughly enjoyed that period of studying, and I ultimately succeeded. And I think it's a nice example because it shows that motivation makes a big difference, right? Despite if you have science to back it up or not, I think it's a gut feeling that we're all aware of. And if you would apply that analogy of that story to interventions in the education system, I think we can expect a similar outcome. If we have people that are really intrinsically motivated, their results inevitably should be better. Now, why I think the science is important behind that is because it really gives us a structured way of talking about it, a language to talk about it. That's really important. I can only tell a story using words like intrinsic motivation and drive. And I think we have so much shared understanding of what those things mean then. And I think the second part of that question, because about the turbulent times that we're currently experiencing, I think it's really important for the people on the ground doing the work that they're doing to be resilient to all the pushback or all the difficult circumstances that they might be experiencing at the moment. And I think that motivation can really help to fuel that resistance and to build grit with the people who need it the most at this time, I think. Maybe, yeah, to conclude the answer, I think we can consider motivation a bit as the fuel. It's not an extra add-on, it's not an extra element to think about, but it's really the fuel that keeps the fire going, or it's the fuel that keeps the car going. But it's also important, of course, to have a car, to have a system. And I think there are a lot of analogies in the work of STIR, not analogies, but explicit links in the work of STIR with systems thinking as well. I really appreciated the idea of working with leverage points, and perhaps motivation can be such a leverage point where a small tweak or a small increase in motivation can really lead to big results. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks a lot, Kun, for sharing your personal story and the analogies as well. So I think let's move on, zoom in into a bit into the country level. So we have here Goretti. Goretti, you've been, as you mentioned, Uwezo has been a long-term partner for STIR in Uganda. And I think you have seen our work very up close. So from your perspective, how do you think STIR's work on motivation has contributed to the wider education system? and what opportunities do you see for it to do even more? So yeah, Goretti.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luciana. And thanks very much to staff for the invitation. I've been privileged, as I said earlier, to be part of the STAR journey since they started in Uganda in 2014, and witnessing them expand, growing from a few hundreds of teachers to hundreds of thousands of teachers being impacted, and millions of children being impacted, many districts and schools participating. So it's been kind of fun to see the contribution, but also working closely with some of the colleagues in STAR, the staff, the leadership, Modern, Jen, Brenda, and others, and seeing them actually living the intrinsic motivation to contribute to the networks that we are contributing to together, like Regional Education Learning Initiative, has been really gratifying. Speaking to the general education system, I can highlight 3 or 4 areas where I've seen, I think STAR has contributed greatly. One is in the systemic integration of intrinsic motivation thinking and practices, kind of moving the concept from textbooks to real practice, because I believe every person who does education studies these concepts in theory, extrinsic, intrinsic motivation, but I think STAR brought these concepts alive, and seeing them being implemented at a system level through peer network meetings and feedback, basically seeing these routines becoming part of the practice in the education system has been very gratifying. And I think most of the evaluation studies on STAR have indicated that actually these routines have been integrated in the system, in our classrooms, in our schools, and so on. The other one, number 2, is about the contribution to teacher effectiveness. I think the findings that we have seen for Uganda, where actually STAR apparently has made an impact on learning outcomes and literacy and numeracy, it's not accidental. That shows that also the practices of teachers have been actually improved. Indeed, again, the evaluation studies prior to this have indicated that most of the teachers who have participated in the STAR networks have testified to benefiting from learning from each other through, for example, joint lesson planning, getting feedback from others. I think that has basically contributed to the learning outcomes that we have seen improving. Thirdly is the strengthened education system leadership, both at subnational level and also at national level. I think one of the strengths of STAR is that partnership with the system. At national level, they've partnered with the Ministry of Education, the commissioners, the directors, are also partnering with associations like UNATU, Uganda National Teachers Union, the district education officials. Yes, I think the evaluation shows that somehow the education officials, for example, were seeing themselves as contributors rather than participants. But they have been impacted, I believe, that now there is potential for them to transfer such practices to their own workplaces. And I think that has been a fantastic contribution. Lastly, on the contribution is I think, resilience and motivation during crisis. We saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic, when STAR actually continued mobilizing people to even meet virtually and so on. But also, I think this is the kind of thinking that is going to take us forward. And this launches me into the next part of the question. What opportunities do we see STAR doing more? I think where we are as the world of education and the changing environment for funding and partnerships and so on, what is going to keep the system moving and doing more of what they've been doing is intrinsic motivation. I mean, when there is reduced funding, increased workloads, a lot of stress, what will keep people moving unless there's that kind of intrinsic motivation? And I think this is where STAR can contribute more. intrinsic motivation goes beyond the boundaries of classrooms or schools to include other actors that John McIntosh also spoke to, other civil society organizations, for example, university actors or teacher educators, government officials. How do they see this not just to impact on teachers, but also impacting on the practices that they also do in their own environments? There's potential to use ICT, for example, to scale the good practices here. If not yet, I don't know if STAR has already developed online modules, and also ensuring that I saw that, for example, interaction continued virtually during when the system was closed. I think we should do more of that. And then lastly is the issue of maximizing partnerships, already maximizing partnerships for fundraising. I think funding is going to increasingly become a challenge to most of the things that we want to do, but also scaling. So STAR can maximize their involvement in partnerships like Regional Education Learning Initiative, where they are really big actors and big contributors, but also maximizing that space to fundraise more and also bring on board in terms of understanding of intrinsic motivation of the actors that are participating in those spaces. Otherwise, looking forward to seeing more contribution from STAR to our education system. And I congratulate you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Goretti, for bringing the insights from Uganda and also the work that we did there, along with the partnership with you. I think moving to Pankaj, because I know like Goretti, Pankaj is also working on strengthening the education system. So Pankaj, how are you actually thinking about bringing motivation science into your own work?
Thanks for the question. And I had a long list of things to congratulate STAR on, but unfortunately, going last, you realize that you're robbed of every point already. But there is still some very interesting things as a peer organization that I want to congratulate STAR on before I sort of go down to that question. I think the approach that you've taken, in your interventions, is not like a toolkit. It is genuinely an approach of building intrinsic motivation, and it is so steeped in the system, of strengthening the system, building teacher agency. I don't think that you, by any means, and at that price point, can say that you've had modest results. I think those results are exceptional. I don't think you should beat yourself at all for those results. And as luck would have it, you have sort of a control there itself. You have a bunch of results which are showing you what success looks like, and then another bunch from which you can get lessons from. And I think that's a really good combination to have. And both of these are at scales that are unheard of. So if you were working with very, very small scale interventions, I think your imagination would have been stretched already if you had to scale them at sort of a district, subnational and national level. So these interventions are pretty scale ready. And I think those are really, really important things, which investors, funders, and your government partners should consider as they work with you, because I think those areas are what makes these interventions really scalable and impactful. And I think sort of going to your question now, I think the core question, like STAR, that we are sort of dealing with is that how do you build interventions that teachers, head teachers, system actors invest in. And by investing in, I do not only mean financial investment, but emotional, motivational, time investments. I think sort of just a quick consideration of who these teachers are and system actors are. Often these are teachers who are vilified, who are thought to be shirking work. They are thought to be, in terms of, sort of ability to deliver. You always think of an alternate route, more boots on the ground, more investments, as opposed to strengthening these teachers. And these teachers are often overburdened with trainings and so many distractions and additional workloads. And I think the core question for us is that how do you build agency amongst teachers? How do you ensure that they have the subject knowledge and knowledge of effective pedagogy? And with all of the other factors that I mentioned, do they still find motivation, intrinsic, extrinsic nudges, their North Star to continue to do this well day in, day out, 365 days. And I'm sure that you've heard this so many times that a teacher's job doesn't stop. And I think that's the core question that we are seeking to answer. And where we are seeking to answer this is at a student level, that what motivates a student? How does a teacher motivate a student, to continue to, look at and engage with pedagogical inputs? How do you make sure that teachers actually go the distance and often do more than what it takes? How do you look at teacher educators to look at teacher education beyond just teacher training, but looking at sort of the kind of support that they need to provide and to ensure that teachers stay motivated and focused? And what are the modes of doing this efficiently but also effectively? And I think while you have actually tackled this very difficult question of linking something which is 3 levels removed, to student learning outcomes, I think that is one of the most difficult things to prove. So just sort of getting teachers to be motivated is very difficult, but then to prove that these motivated teachers have gone on to get the needle move on different indicators is very difficult. And that's also a similar challenge that we are in. And the last one that I want to sort of talk about is that how do you get system actors to continue to invest in teachers, in teaching, in effective teaching methodologies, in efforts to motivate and build teacher capacities over time, and not to look at it as a quick fix, where one round of training or one input can address many of these issues. And that's one of the things that I loved about the STIR model. It is a cyclical model. It's not a one-time effort. It's not a training that you've thrown at a problem. And the fact that it is these system actors who continue to deliver this, I think the thing that I would really look forward to, and I think that's one of the other challenges that, like STIR, that we have, is to look out for the fade. Once you do this work and you have these results, I think the desire to find stickiness within the system, that that there is no diminishing returns on motivation, there are no diminishing returns on student learning outcomes. I'm very hopeful that these methods that you've used will be, I think, both inspirational for teachers, but may also prove to be far more inclined to be scaled over long term by the system. I think that's a really difficult ask. So I think those are 4 areas, just to quickly recap again. So to ensure teachers continue to motivate students, teachers stay motivated and focused and use effective pedagogy themselves, teacher educators find ways of motivating our teachers and baking that into the teacher professional development efforts. And the system recognizes motivation as a true factor that will determine teacher performance. Pretty much, similar experiences. Clearly, we haven't had the level of success that you guys have. So congratulations once more.
Thanks a lot, Pankaj. I think what Pankaj says kind of leads to maybe Aashti's previous comment on the challenges that she hasn't mentioned. So Pankaj mentioned about, like sustaining the motivation. Is it one of the challenges? Aashti, I'll go back and I'll hand it over to you, but I would like to also encourage the audience. So if you have any questions, just write in the Q&A box and we'll try to answer your question. So yeah, Aashti, moving a bit into what Pankaj has shared a little bit about the sustaining motivation. Is it one of the challenges that you also wanted to talk about earlier? So over to you, Aashti.
Thank you. Yeah, let me build a little bit on what Pankaj said. So I think that certainly is something that I was thinking about, but I think more broadly, I think what was on my mind is something that John mentioned, which is what when we think about these different sets of stakeholders that Pankaj mentioned, teachers, school leaders, students, what are the actual levers that we have at our disposal to actually drive motivation? And I think what I'm hearing from the team at STIR is that the science and the practice, we still have a bit of work to do to really try and understand for each of these different set of stakeholders, what are the underlying levers and the practical strategies that we can use to really drive motivation. We may, as we've heard, have some hypotheses about what is working, but I think for all of us, there's probably some work to be done to really try and understand a little bit more about what it actually takes and what can we take away in terms of actually driving real, sustained change, as Pankaj said, on the ground. The second thing, Rezi, that I was thinking about was the challenges around measurement, right? So the evaluation, for example, showed that there were some contradictory findings between self-reported motivation and actual outcomes. I'd like to get a little bit more into that to help understand how we can develop sort of appropriate metrics and frameworks for motivation, so that, especially in these diverse cultural contexts in which all of us are working, how do we measure how motivation is manifesting itself differently? So both thinking about the mechanics, but also the measurement. And then I think the third thing that really was on my mind, and this is both an opportunity but a challenge, is that STIR is sort of thinking about motivation as a supercharger or as something that amplifies. So motivation science, for example, is complementing but doesn't actually replace other technical, more pedagogical interventions. So I think for all of us, we would need to find that right balance between motivational strategies and the actual technical intervention that we're implementing, whether it's a foundational learning intervention or something around, really enhancing teachers' professional capabilities. So trying to get that balance right. And I'll stop there and hand back to you.
I think Koen might have something. Over to you, Koen.
I have something, and it's a question. I actually wanted to pick up on what Pankaj said earlier, and Aashti also referred to it. The challenge of linking the motivation, the teacher motivation with student learning outcomes. It's quite a big step, I think, and Pankaj rightfully congratulated STIR to find an explicit impact there. But I was wondering, and to be honest, I don't know the exact approach of the research, so maybe it was done like that. But I was wondering, would it make sense to maybe try to look at the steps in between? Pankaj said 3 steps. I was thinking only about 1 step, so Pankaj, please add on if you have more ideas. But I'm thinking it's probably more feasible to link teacher motivation to the quality of their lesson plans, to the quality of their teaching materials that they're using and creating, maybe to their pedagogical knowledge or to the knowledge and the application of proven classroom management techniques, teaching techniques. So that link, I think, would be easier to make. And consequently, you could probably also link those items then to the student learning outcomes. And if you have that set of items to look at in between, maybe it's easier to find the evidence, more explicit evidence, and maybe it's also easier to have the conversation about how teacher motivation indirectly then impacts student learning outcomes. I don't know what the panelists think about it, and also very keen to hear STIR's own people on that.
Thanks. Pankaj, would you like to respond to what Koen has said earlier?
I can come in later. It'll be good for somebody from STIR to respond to this.
Okay, can I invite John? Would you like to share, or anyone?
Yeah, very, very happy to. So, like this question of the link between teacher motivation and student learning outcomes, there isn't very much. I mean, there's been some studies that have been done that have tried to make the link, and they're generally pretty inconsistent. Certainly, you don't see a reliable link between them, which we think is super interesting, right? Because I think we know intuitively that this matters, and motivation does matter. But yet, particularly when we ask about self-reported motivation, to get to Ashti's question, is that it's often just quite unreliable and inconsistent. And this is something you see in psychology more broadly, that there's increasing doubt about how useful self-reports are, particularly when you're asking about how people feel about something, because it varies, right? And even the word motivation we find is sometimes interpreted in very, very different ways. So I think to really get under the hood of this stuff, you've got to also have some behavioral indicators. um, so for us, we think about, well, if we're talking about motivated teachers, what specifically would we expect them to do? And what are the concrete things that we can track that tell us whether that's happening? So is it that they are trying new things out in the classroom based on what they've learned? Well, you can track that because you can go into classrooms and see whether that's happening and check the patterns over time. So I think for us, it's finding ways to triangulate all these different things that can give you a plausible account of whether motivation is happening and what the links are to other outcomes.
Yeah, I can build on that, John. Thanks so much. So I think one of the interesting sort of insight that I can offer is from our own randomized control trial, which was with a bunch of teachers in Odisha for a program at scale, which is a remediation program. And I think there are sort of three factors there which are very interesting and may sort of respond to the question. So one is that the remediation program required teachers to learn a new pedagogical method and approach of targeted instruction. And it was just not at their approach level. They also had to set out time to teach these children pass grade competencies and lessons which had been identified for them. So that's clearly a bother. That's additional work for teachers in secondary schools, covering competencies for pass grade and covering lessons and for pass grade. And I think that the third one was that uh, uh, to make matters more difficult or interesting, we and our principal investigators decided that we also wanted to check that what if we offered teachers autonomy, where we said that they had a choice of on several areas, including covering a part of competencies and selecting these and delivering these on their own, building lesson plans, would they be able to do this? And I think what was very interesting for us was that despite the fact that initially, as we started the program, teachers were not inclined, they were not motivated to take on this additional work. We had to cajole them into taking this on. And there was a lot of pushback at a systemic level. Despite the fact that the entire state government had mandated for this to be done, there was a lot of pushback. But as teachers sort of kind of lumped it and then learned these methods and started to deliver this structured, time-bound program, they did start to see the traction on learning. They did see that children were learning, and that itself was the first point of motivation. I think the second thing was that for them to be able to then transact the grade level curriculum a little bit easily and a lot better, was the second point that motivated them. So they started to feel that, well, the kids are learning now. That's a broad, sort of a development. My job is becoming easier, and I'm able to, have better gains out of it. That's the second point of motivation. And I think the third one, which was very, very interesting for us, was that we had thought that when we offer this autonomy, and so had our government counterparts, we felt that the teachers would abdicate. But I think it had reached to a point of that intrinsic motivation where the teachers continued with the program nevertheless, and despite our worst fears, still they delivered some form of a program, and eking out almost same standard deviation gains as the first arm, where the structured, time-bound, specific intervention was to be delivered. And I think the lesson for us there was that I think sort of being a part of something which is transformational statewide was deeply motivating. Having a very distinct role to be played there was very, very motivating. And I think when they were able to see improvements at state level performance and to be recognized as a pioneering program also was deeply motivating. And I think some of them also started to really look at and develop a lot of organic material around the program. So, for example, additional content, audio video content, for students or for teachers on how to mark grading sheets. I think that also tells you that I think really driving change like this really requires building motivation. And at a systemic level, not just sort of creating a mandate, but nurturing this motivation, way beyond just the initial task probably is super important. And I think that's where the government of Odisha and our counterparts in Odisha did exceedingly well. We hadn't thought of it. We actually had only thought of that direct relationship between our program and the better content, better delivery, better subject knowledge. But all of the additionalities was thought through by our colleagues in Odisha. So I think, that's sort of partly the response. But if there are any additional questions, happy to answer those.
Thanks a lot, Pankaj. I think I highlighted some of the how like motivation can really drive the systemic level change. I know that Goretti also working in Uganda with system change as well. Did you have the similar experience or ideas that to what Pankaj has said? And especially what kind of practical actions that you would encourage NGOs to do in driving change, especially maybe we talk about the resource constrained environment as the theme for our today's discussion. So, Goretti, speaking from your experience.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think really going back to the discussion that was preceding this on the difficulty of attributing the impact of STAR to the learning outcomes. I think most of the interventions we engage in as civil society and other people who bring in interventions, it's quite always difficult to attribute, but sometimes it's easy. We can see the contribution. So, for example, the previous some of the reports that I've read of information that I've accessed about STAR education refers to, of course, the reported improved practice of teachers, where they're saying, okay, now they can plan the lesson plans well because they've learned some good practices from others, or they've learned some good practices of teaching and learning or managing large classes from others. It may not be a direct link, but I think it somehow, contributes. So in terms of what we could do, I think differently, starting from what we are expecting the schools and teachers to do, that should come to us also. I think we should leave intrinsic motivation ourselves. So, and I think I talked about this in one of the final statements that I made. How many organizations are exposed, or practitioners are exposed to the importance of intrinsic motivation? Maybe this is an area where STAR education can also contribute, because what is going to increasingly drive the system is not going to be about the inputs too much, because the inputs are not there. Money is not there. Money is becoming scarce and scarce. What is going to improve the system are those little actions that are needed without massive resources that can create a big impact. And I think as we talk about, as we make recommendations from the different studies or assessments that we do, we should hesitate making big recommendations of increase funding here and there, because funding is becoming very, very scarce. So, but what are those practices that are requiring little investment, but maybe with a drive and little intrinsic motivation of the people involved, it can actually result into a bigger impact. So I think even changing the narrative, what we say and what we do, is something that we can get, is an inspiration that we can get from the work of STAR.
Thanks so much for encouraging us, Goretti. Aashti, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. No, I was just thinking exactly, just to echo Goretti, it feels almost like, again, kind of a crude analogy, but like taking like a protein powder or like taking creatine before going to the gym. In a way, what Goretti mentioned, and I think, the conditions that all of our community and the wider sector is operating in, there are significant resource constraints, both financial and otherwise. And I think the cost effectiveness of the intervention that STIR offers, I think, can be seen as that, extra supercharger, as the team have spoken about. But I think, as Goretti sort of wisely pointed out, there's huge potential, but I think we still need to think about, there will still need to be some careful consideration given to the training, the monitoring, and the adaptation that's needed to layer this onto an existing intervention. So I think it's hugely exciting, and I think there's a lot of potential. And I think that's really why I was very excited about the opportunity to engage in this conversation and, read the results of the evaluation. And now I think it's really, how do we kind of take some of these findings and really kind of field test them in other conditions, and think about really how you measure it, how you provide the training, because even though it is, we all intuitively think we understand, but as as today's conversation has unpacked, there's a lot more nuance to potentially our intuitive understanding of motivation than we previously may have understood. So I guess just to say that, hugely excited, but also really looking forward to thinking about the practical nuts and bolts of what it takes to think about how this can be a supplement, a powerful supplement or a supercharger to some of the interventions that folks are rolling out at scale.
Thanks a lot, Aashti, for that thoughts. So I'll go to Pankaj and Koen, but in the interest of time, so I think we're almost at the end, and it's been fantastic. I wish we had a longer discussion of this, but I'll hand it over to Pankaj to just maybe say your reflection and sort of like a closing thought on the whole theme of what we have discussed today. So over to you, Pankaj.
Yeah, just building on what Aashti said, I think you have something which is drought-proof. It is really systems driven. It doesn't need a lot of investment. And I think you don't need to prove this over and over again. You've actually proved your model. So congratulations for that. And I think time is to really work with a lot of actors to try and scale the approach, and really focusing on the teachers aspect of it, sort of, working very closely with teachers to make sure they understand, they deliver this really well. I think sort of the proof of impact, sort of the burden of impact is out of the way. So congratulations. And clearly this is drought proof.
Thanks so much, Pankaj, for that. Koen, your reflection? Sorry, Koen, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I actually wanted to pick in on what Moazem asked in the chat as well, and it was being discussed on screen. Because I think it's a really relevant question. We're probably all aware that motivation can also wear off, right? We're not equally motivated every single day, and I think it's really important to also have systems in place to keep the impacts and effects of initially motivated teachers, to keep those impacts going. And Aashti already made an analogy with working out. It's the same. I think I can be very motivated at the start. I can go to the gym 3 times a week the first week and then quit the week after because it just wasn't a very sustainable approach. Or I can build a system to channel my motivation and to make sure I have an achievable goal and a fixed time to working out every week, for example. Be a bit more modest at first and a bit less disruptive to my daily life and other things that I have going on. So I think that's a bit, the next question to ask ourselves. Also linking it with what John said earlier about what does a motivated teacher look like? I think that's a really, really good question to ask ourselves. What behaviors do they show? And then consequently, like, how do we build systems and habits to keep those behaviors going, to make them sustainable behaviors? I think that would be a really good next step to think about.
Thanks so much, Koen, for that. So, yeah, Goretti, your final reflection of the whole thing that we have discussed today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think the issue of motivation, intrinsic motivation, was needed yesterday, is needed tomorrow, and it is needed today and tomorrow. I think that is what is going to keep systems really going, because resources will never be sufficient, never. And I think where we are globally, the effects of the COVID-19, what is happening with the funding situation, I think we are going to need more drive internally to drive what we do than just resources, simply resources. So that said, I think I would encourage start to really, despite the constraints we are all experiencing, to push on. The ground is already ripe. I can't imagine how much they've expanded since I first knew them in 2014 until today. There's already scope for scaling this good initiative in the education system, the schools, but also with other stakeholders that are contributing to the education system. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Goretti. So thanks a lot to our panelists. I think we are at the end of the finish line here. I wish that we would still continue talking about the motivation. And I think there are a lot of other things that we still need to delve deep into. But I think the key that I've picked up is that partnership, as you mentioned, collaboration, how we can help the other organizations to understand motivation will be really key. And also, especially in this such a resource constrained environment, I feel that its collaboration is going to be what we all need. Sharing this kind of panel discussion should happen a bit, more often. So that's that. Thanks a lot. It's been an honor to all of our panelists today. Thank you so much. And I think thank you everyone who have joined with us. And it's been such a fantastic session. And I will hand it over back to Jenny Wilmot, our co-CEOs, for some closing thoughts. Jenny, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rezi. And a huge thank you to all the panelists. That was such a rich conversation. There's so much for us to take away there. And I can see there's continues to be chat in the Q&A, and I hope we've covered people's questions and thoughts. I was really struck by the idea of motivation as a fuel and not an add-on or an extra, and how it can complement existing programs and not replace them. And also some of the thoughts around how it's more important now than ever in these times. Goretti, you spoke about that, but several of you did as well, to kind of keep people moving forward, and a way that systems can be improved with fairly small actions that can really make a big impact. I loved your Odisha example as well, where you could really see a virtuous circle of as teachers got more motivated, they got more connected to the purpose, they felt themselves improving, and they got more motivated to achieve. There's obviously lots for us to still understand, and there is a question about how do we take these really exciting findings to understand them more deeply, to understand some of that nuance of what a motivated teacher really looks like, what the behaviour is, what is the connection and how do we continue to understand that between motivation and student outcomes. It's been a really good starting point in terms of some of those conversations, and we really hope that you'll keep in touch. And if you're particularly interested in some of the learning that we've shared today and some of these discussions, please do get in touch with us after the session. We are going to share a short feedback sheet. We'd love to get your feedback. We do hope to continue to do webinars like these around this subject, so your feedback will be very invaluable. Mark has just shared that in the chat.